So sit comfortably. We've just finished Sesshin. We did a 5-day retreat. And the forms and ceremonies and the liturgy, the whole way we conduct ourselves in Sesshin has been handed down to us for centuries. Maybe we would mark it back most clearly to Dogen Zenji in the 13th century in Japan. He had spent many years, or a number of years, in China. So some of the forms come through China to Japan and then to us, mainly through the United States, and then from there it's flowed across to Europe and Australia and South America and other parts of the world. And we have modified the forms. We do them in the same spirit, but there's been some changes to how we do them. And those changes have come about not because we think that the traditional way doesn't work. And when we say, what do we mean by work? I think we mean having the capacity to create conditions so that we can be liberated from self-concern, which is the cause and source of our suffering. And in being liberated from self-concern, the extra space and energy that it generates in us allows us to be more fully ourselves and therefore more beneficial in the world and more joyful. We can experience the world more fully and appreciate ordinary life more fully when we're liberated from self-concern. So these traditional forms have shown themselves for centuries to create conditions for that liberation. And I want to read a story that captures the kind of real intensity. This is from 1948. The real intensity of how sesshins can be. It's the account of a woman's first sesshin. And you might find some of it a bit shocking because it has such a fierce quality to it. And the fierceness might sound like it's a kind of harshness, almost sort of punitive or something. But any true teacher, everything that they are doing and saying is for the benefit of the students. It's always for the benefit of the students. It's never for anything else. So I want to read out the story and then go through how we have modified it and why we've modified it since that time. So I've just kind of taken various paragraphs. This is from a book called In This Body, in This Lifetime. It's students of Sosen Nagasawa Niroshi, who was one of the most prominent woman Zen masters at that time. I think maybe the first, I'm not sure. No, probably not the first, but a very renowned Roshi at that time in the 1940s, so just after the Second World War. And this story is a woman's account. She lost her son in the war and spent 3 years in intense grief, finding it very hard to see any purpose in her life, having lost her only son, deeply in her grief and wanting her life to be over, but knowing that that's not what her son would want for her. So in that sort of year, those 3 years, she eventually turned to Zen practice to see if that could help her find a way out. So this is...
In Japan?
In Japan, yeah, in Japan. So this is part of her story. One day I met Sozen Nagasawa Roshi of Kenonji, the nuns' training monastery, and listened to one of her talks. At first I thought, how could a nun who has never given birth or raised a child, let alone had her child killed, ever understand this pain and this suffering? There is no one in this world that I can turn to. I mean, people have that thought when their relationships break up. No one could be suffering as much as I am suffering now. I remember, I'm just remembering my son many years ago saying, "You don't know anything about love," when his relationship ended, like he was 15. Thank you for that. So we can laugh, but of course people often feel very alone in their pain. So, understandably, this woman is feeling profoundly isolated in her pain. But for whatever reason, she made that move of going to a Zen monastery. So she's thinking, there is no one in the world I can turn to. My heart remained shut tight. However, as I listened to her, I was deeply moved by her character. There was something untouchable. There was some untouchable intensity about her. At the same time, she had a childlike innocence that pulled me toward her. I thought, she is different from the other nuns I have met so far. I was gradually drawn in more and more by her lectures and started to think that maybe I would give Zazen a try. I went at first for 2 days of sesshin, then 3 days, and finally I completed a whole 7-day sesshin. As one retreat followed another, so this is an account of multiple sessions, I realise now as I'm rereading. As one retreat followed another, my foolishness keenly sunk into my mind. I realised that although Roshi didn't have the experience of giving birth to a child, raising him and having him die, from the perspective of practice, she possessed exalted experience surpassing that of the mothers of the world. She was strict and fierce, and yet the shining light of her great compassion guided this community, composed of very different people with complete mastery. This was the true mind of compassion. I resolved that I would train under her and break through the ultimate barrier. So she's going to talk about the koan mu here, which is one of the classic koans in the Zen tradition. It's this word that means has not, and people work with this word not as a mantra that you repeat, but as kind of a way to open up a profound inquiry into the nature of reality and into the nature of our experience of reality, because that's the only thing we have. We can't actually know reality, but we can know our experience of reality to some extent. So working with Mu gives people some capacity to really very precisely inquire into the nature of things and our relationship to the nature of things. So she's going to mention this word Mu throughout this next passage. In the pursuit of Mu, I didn't change my meditation posture and I didn't sleep. I lost sensation in my whole body from the pain in my legs. Even when I was in a continuous struggle that felt like 1,000 deaths and 1,000,000 hardships without any mercy, I was hit hard from behind. So she was hit with the Kiyosaku stick, which I will also talk about. I'll talk about that afterwards. It was the first time in my life that I had ever been hit by someone, and in that instance I thought, how barbaric. My resistant mind started to heat up, and I went to Dokusan furious and crying. But the abbess roared at me, "Don't try to argue, it's just your ego attachment." And she chased me away with the ringing of her bell. Mu, 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 I grappled with Mu with all my might. But even while I was desperately putting my life on the line, I would just hear from the abbot saying, "That's just emotion. That's an excuse." That's just an explanation. What are you dawdling about? As I was scolded thoroughly, my beliefs and ideas were being destroyed. With the passage of time, I lost my appetite. I couldn't sleep at night, and I just sat up in meditation, the exhaustion of my body and mind reaching an extreme. During Kinhin, walking meditation, I couldn't take even a single step. I was seized by Mu, tormented by Mu. I was crying out Mu, yet I could not grasp Mu. During Dokusan, I was told, that's just hallucinations, that's just belief, that's just an idea. I'd exhausted all means and I had nothing to hang on to, thrown down and sunk to the very bottom. But with progress of the practice, my self-centeredness started to recede. And freed from distracting thoughts, gradually I was able to break out into an expansive, bright world. From the bottom of my heart, I could prostrate myself in gratitude for a single slice of pickled radish or a single grain of rice in the gruel. I was painfully aware that unless I endured the hardships of practice and really experienced awakening myself in a time of crisis, it was all for no use. This really soaked into the marrow of my bones. I went out into the garden and quietly sat. In front of the temple there was a large tree, almost reaching to the clouds. Harmonizing with my moo, 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 the tree was making the earth tremble, urging me on. All the flowers and every single azalea leaf was talking to me. At night, the bright moon became one with me, laughing. Morning came. How pleasant was the morning practice. How clear the little bird's song was. The sound of the cutting board of the temple's cook was so crisp. Chop, chop, chop. The sound of the mallet of the elderly lady living behind the temple cracking open soybean pods. Everything was an exquisite piece of music that no words in the world could describe. I guess this is what it means to go to the Pure Land, the greatest joy, I thought. There was no longer the troublesome Saha world, the world of suffering, nor was there even the venerable abbess. The clinging to my beloved dead son had disappeared, as had the painful pursuit of Mu in this samadhi of Dharma joy. However, once again, I was startled by the roar of the abbess and a whack, whack, whack of the stick. I was instructed to return to Mu, and again, Mu, Mu, Mu. A tiny bug landing on the paper screen. It was Mu. An aeroplane flying through the sky. It was Mu. The whole universe was nothing but Mu. The paper screen inside of me started to dissolve, and I couldn't see anymore. My body felt as if it was being pulled into the deep bottom of the earth. When the temple bell rang in that instant, suddenly it broke through. I realized that heaven and earth are one. Myself and the universe are one. Buddha is what I am. There is only unity. Everything is Mu. This great treasure I grasped had not even a gap of a feather to pass through. No one could ever harm it. It transcends even death. The venerable abbess herself could not damage or destroy it. It is perfect. It is perfect. It is perfect. Even the venerable abbess probably didn't reach this far, I thought. And I was finally able to go to Dokusan as the original self, imperturbable. For the first time, the venerable abbess smiled warmly and approved my experience. Then she gave me various guidelines and cautions. So I don't know how these stories land for you, how they feel for you, but I have found them very inspiring stories. They might sound very harsh, and they are in a certain kind of way. And I think what we do differently in the West now, I'll go through a few steps, but overall what we do differently is rather than the teacher being one to set the tone, In some ways, the teacher waits to see how the student wants to set the tone. Does a student want to come into Dokusan and just get straight to the point? Or do they want to come in and kind of connect a bit first? Or do they want to come in and talk about how what's happening in their life is informing their practice and how their practice is informing their life? You know, these are different ways that we can communicate in Dokusan, in that one-to-one private interview that we do in Sesshin and that we also do here at times as well. So I think that's part of the shift, is that it's more student-led these days than teacher-led. So some of the ways in which things have changed is first, very obviously, the Kiyosaku stick. So when I did my training in the 90s and the early 2000s, I received the stick many times and I walked the stick. I was the tanto who used the stick and I loved it. It really has a way to kind of help people focus. You hear the whack sound of the stick on other people's shoulders. You feel it on your own. In the West, I don't know that there's anybody that does it without it being requested first. So people are sitting in Zazen, maybe they can feel themselves being sleepy or just feeling like they're not very focused, and so then they can request the stick. And so then you lean one shoulder forward so that the teacher can, or the tanto can strike on the muscle bands there, strike on the muscle bands there. So I think everywhere it's done on request. Don't think anywhere that I'm aware of does it without request. But traditionally, in Japan it was, and in this woman's experience, you know, she'd just be sitting there and all of a sudden, whack, getting struck. But you can hear the tanto walking the stick. Normally the tradition is when the tanto's walking, they slide their feet on the floorboards so you can hear the sound. It's a very subtle sound. But if you're sitting very still, you hear the sound of the tanto's feet on the floorboard. So you know it's coming. You just don't know if you're going to get struck. But the way I experienced it was on request. So now a lot of zendos don't even have a kiyosaku stick in the zendo. Some have it just on the altar. It's just there. Some zendos, the stick is used to open and close the zendo at the beginning, at the end of each day. And we don't have one. But I still honour the kiyosaku and think it's very valuable. And we don't have the statue here, but it's Sesshin. We have Manjushri. All that's with the sword. But it's got a similar feeling to it. It's sort of like here and now, you know, here and now. So that's different. Dokusan is also, like I just described, done a little bit differently. It's more led by, as the practitioner comes in the door, that kind of in some way sets what that exchange is going to be like by the way they initiate the dialogue. I can be just a little bit firm in Dokusan. I can sometimes say something like, well, anybody could say that. I might say something like that to someone when they say, everything's interconnected. I might say, well, anybody can say that. How do I know you get that? You know, so a little bit of a push, like a little dharma push to see what happens next. There's also the difference between sort of a Soto and Rinzai style. We're a blend of both, but maybe a little more tilted towards the Soto, which is a kind of comes from, you could say, it's got a bit of a kind of gentleness because it's really working from this base that we're already Buddhas, so there's nothing to do. So that kind of underlines the whole thing. You're already a Buddha, there's nothing to do. You just do Zazen anyway, you know, so it's... Whereas the Rinzai is a little bit more of, you know, life is short, do you want to wake up or not? Get on with it. You know, so we have a mixture of both. I think Western psychology has had a big impact on the way things are happening over the last 4 or 5 decades. a much greater understanding that although this traditional way may create very good conditions for people's liberation, for at least a significant percentage of people, it actually is distressing for them and harmful for them and causes them to turn away from practice. And I think the West has understood that better, and so it's like you could say trauma-informed. It understands that for some people that kind of harsh language and having a stick that's going whack, whack on people's shoulders it's going to be hard to trust that can be for people's benefit. You know, it's just going to really feel like it's punitive in some way. So we've learnt from that, and that's why that's, you know, in respect for that significant percentage of people, we don't use those forms anymore. So that's partly being trauma-informed, and then also understanding power dynamics, whether it's the difference between genders or class or culture or race. There are power dynamics that can get mixed up in ways that are not completely healthy with some of these forms. So for these reasons, we don't do them anymore. But I like to think that we don't do them, but we still love them. And that's why I still enjoy reading these stories. I can still love those forms even though we don't do them anymore. We do them in just a different way. They're not completely gone. The echo is still there. Yeah, I think that might be enough. I'll just make it so I can see everybody online. So would anyone in the Zendo or online like to comment or ask a question? Yes, Jamal. Oh, hold on, let's just do this. And that to you. There we go.
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. This is maybe a slightly well, I think this question maybe goes to the thing I'm questioning. And so I want to start by just noting that I ask this as somebody who, through personal experiences, had a few of those things that, you know, it's important to be trauma-informed about. I think I speak as somebody who has often, in various parts of life, been one of those people that a little care needs to be taken with. But I guess my question is, how do we balance the line between the obvious need to ensure that people are not distressed and to make sure that people are able to engage with the practice, but also acknowledge that some of the things and the ways in which people get distressed around that is itself the very thing that needs to be given up in order for the practice to progress. And, you know, I think in the West, we have a very self-focused idea about how we want to engage with even religious practice, or I want to engage with my meditation in my way and, you know, do it in the way that I like. And I feel like I sometimes observe that the willingness that we often have in religious settings to cater to people's individual preferences and the way that they like to do things, particularly in Buddhism, I feel like can often run counter to the very practice that we're trying to teach. And I guess I don't have an answer. I'm interested in your thoughts on the tricky balance between how do you work through that?
I think it's not easy. It's not easy, and I think it's something that we're learning. That's what's happening. And I think in the long run, this will, as we learn and experiment with how do you acknowledge that people have trauma and how do we work with it at the same time as not wanting to, you know, not do the practice fully and not create a stronger identification with the trauma, which in a way is part of is part of the barrier. I don't think that that's easy, but I guess I would say overall, until a person can love and accept themselves and can accept all the things that have happened to them, like not that it's okay, but be able to be fully with it, that needs to happen for it to be let go of. So the kind of it's a really delicate sort of subtle movement between helping a person acknowledge what they're carrying with respect so that then they can begin to put it down. And I think that it's an art form, really. And I think that's part of what makes good Zen teachers and good friends and good therapists is being able to work. I think it's like an art form. It takes a lot of subtlety. There's no formula for how that works. So the other thing that the West has really brought in is the benefits of therapy and practice together. You do the very targeted, precise work about your own particular life history and your own particular vulnerabilities. You do that with therapists, and you do the broader kind of overall work of what is the source of people's suffering. You do that in your Zen practice. So the two kind of go together. Thank you very much for sharing your sense that you, like all of us, actually need to be taken care of a little bit, because no one gets through to our age. No one gets through to adulthood without having been hurt. Russ, go ahead. Oh,
Thank you. I want to say that I'm a data point of evidence that it can work for traumatized people if they are able and willing to sit through the difficulties that arise when that Kyosaku is being used. The first time I was in Sesshin and the session, they only use it once, one period per day at San Francisco Zen Center, or at least 20 years ago, that was the practice. And I was a beaten child. So the first time I heard somebody being hit with a stick, I burst into tears and ran out of the room. But I came back and I kept coming back, and gradually over time, I was desensitized to the trauma response to that. And I even could ask for it when I needed it for loosening the muscles or coming back to a wakeful mind or something like that. So it may be that someone there in the Zendo who I don't know might be listening and thinking, oh my God, the whole practice is so barbaric. Who would ever think that that could be helpful? But I just want to provide a little data point that it can be under the right circumstances. And, you know, it only remains to be seen person by person whether that's going to be helpful for any given person or not.
thanks, Russ. Lynn, you can see her there on that screen.
Hello, everyone.
Maybe I can. Actually, how about we try? Do you want to try putting a pin on the person speaking, and then we can all see better? Does it work? Can you do that? Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, please, Lynn.
I think many of you know that I've had a career as a therapist, and someone who has worked a lot with trauma. I think there's different parts of the process, like trauma, undoing trauma is a whole process, and there's different parts that come up at different times. And for someone who has had their power overridden, finding your own power and rebuilding boundaries is so important that and it's a process. So not to get stuck in any particular part of the process, but things need to be reclaimed before the process just naturally moves on to the next phase. The undoing is a very natural thing if it's given, if the process is given enough time, and love is a big part of it, but so is also finding your voice and being given a choice, and then the undoing can actually happen. So I just, like I think it's really important what you're saying there, Nettie, about having therapy in conjunction with session and a sitting practice, zazen. Yeah, and so and also trauma, and the undoing of trauma needs to be witnessed. A witness is really important. So that's where a therapist can come in, and it's an important part of the process.
And I think too that teachers, Zen teachers, can be witnesses as well, because that relationship, that working relationship, is built on trust. Yeah. And it can be done a little differently in Doksan. It tends to be with a lot less words. It's more to do with just eye contact, or certain acknowledgements. It's often done in these kinds of subtle ways, a little differently to how the work is done therapeutically. I think too, one of the benefits of this whole development is now we have a lot more women teachers. We also have a lot more people of colour. We have people who come from more diverse economic backgrounds. It's taking a long time, but that kind of diversity is occurring. When you compare it back to how it traditionally has been, where it was, in Japan, it tended to be handed on through the family, fathers to sons tend to be handed on that way. So now we have this greater diversity, which I think also creates greater capacity for a resonance around the diversity of experiences that people have, and the trauma that they do bring with them in practice. There's more likely you can find a teacher that's maybe going to have greater capacity to understand your background. It's not essential, but it can help. Tony. Hold on, let's just
Yeah, I'll probably just commenting. I haven't. I very fortunate life hadn't had experience with trauma, but I came along to Buddhism through Zen practice, and I found the meditation very hard because of the boredom and then the pain and then you're required to sit through there for the 40 minutes or 25 minutes until the bell rings, and you've got to, and then you can walk sort of thing. And I suppose over time my body and mind figured out how to do that. But it was that process had sort of like a edge of samurai to it. Just sit there. And then was it almost 8 years ago, I went and sat with Arjun Brahm, who's a Thai trained, and the emphasis is very different. And I wonder how it would have affected me, because his emphasis is two things happen. One, he says that meditation should be joyful. He really emphasizes that. Like as I've said, the lines he says are relax to the max, chillax, you're at the beach. And the second thing, so he's trying to brainwash you to find that, and that sort of was a bit of a wake up to me after the sort of minimalist Zen thing. And the second thing he does is there's no requirement to be in the meditation hall at any time. And he says, if you're sitting there and you're having difficulty, just go off and have a sleep and come back when you come back when you're ready. I don't know what would have happened if I'd started with Ajahn Brahm. Would I have just lay down on the bed too much? And at the end of the retreat, I went home and said, well, that was pretty boring, just lying on the bed. I've got to come back and do that. Or would I have been able to continue because he would have brainwashed me enough to find the joy? So I suppose I'm just commenting on the strong, very different approaches between, and obviously Ajahn Brahm's just got lay people, so he doesn't. Sorry, a monastery probably has to be a bit stricter because once upon a time people would go there to get out of being a farmer or something like that, or bludge sort of thing. So you couldn't run a monastery like Ajahn Brahm does for lay people, because the lay people don't have to be, they've got no reason to be there. They might as well go and spend a week in Bali rather than come to a meditation retreat. So yeah, it's just this very different approach and to what Zen has. And I think Zen's softened in the 25 probably odd years I've been associated with it as well, less samurai as well. Right.
Yes, and this is the sort of question that's come up in the centuries about how much effort do we put in and how strict are we, how relaxed are we? And I don't think there's any answer. I think for each of us at different times, different things for different times and for different people, these different practices are beneficial. I guess it's up to us. No one's making us do any of these things. We do what works for us at different times. Yes, Jamal.
I kind of comment such question, but Tony, as someone, my father used to be a caretaker at Ajahn Brahm's monastery for quite a while, and those in the know are aware that Ajahn Brahm is very, very different to how he treats his monks, to how he treats his lay people. It's quite known he's significantly harsher with his monks, and it's almost a shocking thing sometimes for some of the monks when they go in and they think, oh, I know Ajahn Brahm, I know he's this nice guy, and he's suddenly not as nice. And it's like, well, it's just a different approach. You become a monk, you've got to be treated a bit differently and approach it differently. So that approach is very specifically tailored by him for that cohort. And I think it's partially lay. I think it's partially where he is. It's Perth, Western Australia. It's a different lay cohort to Thailand, or a different lay cohort to even here would be that, it's he's very astutely aware of the cultural needs around where he's at. And I guess that kind of goes a little bit to the second part of this. And part of what I was wondering before is that sense of, I think instinctively I worry sometimes that, as you said, it's an art form, finding the exact right balance between the level of softness to help someone come in and to help somebody engage with practice. But you go too soft and, there's a point of the practice is that our minds lie to us. Our minds are telling us things that aren't true. We worry about reinforcing some of the delusions of our mind by kind of being too much like, oh, whatever you want is fine. And, but whatever we want is not fine. That's why we're here. We walked into the Zendo because we were somewhat dissatisfied with how things had gone or how we had approached things. And yeah, it's a subtle art form. And I think what you're saying in the West, and we've kind of softened Zen a little bit. And I think that's probably good, but there's always that question of how far is too much.
That's right. And I don't think we can answer that question. I think people find the teacher that works for them where they're at. And that's great that there's options. It does have to hurt a little bit though. You can't let go of your delusions easily, otherwise we would have just let go of them. it does require a certain vulnerability of a willingness to look at our mental habits. And that's a bit scary. That's always a little bit scary. Margaret. It's still on mute.
Is that better?
Yep, that's good.
It reminds me of books I've read about amazing musicians, amazing ballerinas, ballet dancers, and their training, that they all have had to undergo punitive, cruel sort of teachers. They went to these top teachers, or the top teachers invited them to come and sent them home very often in tears. That there was very little encouragement quite often, but relentless demanding, insisting that this is not good enough, that you're getting this wrong, don't you understand this? And I wonder whether if you want to really aspire, if you're allowed to aspire as a Buddhist, and maybe there's a better word, it's necessary to just, it's a necessary part of the process, because we are deluded, so deluded.
Yeah, I think there's a way. I know what you're talking about with musicians and so on. I do think a good Zen teacher or Buddhist spiritual teacher is never actually cruel. It might look like it, but it never actually is. It's always like for the student's benefit, totally 100%. But you can see, because of like what we know about gymnasts and so on, that method can lead to abuse, and does. It does get misused, because people are people, and even teachers have got their shortcomings and blind spots and do make mistakes. Many a teacher has. So I think the way it's developed in the West now is a safer model. It's a safer model where there still is, I think, like the difficulty, a bit like what Tony was describing, is sitting in sesshin, or just sitting in zazen, just to sit still while your knees are in pain, and to breathe through it and say, I'm not just going to impulsively do whatever I feel like. I'm going to stay with this feeling and breathe through it. This is a mind training. It's a really strong mind and body training. So it's more like it's more led by the Sangha in a certain kind of way now. Rather, I mean, teachers obviously are in a leadership position, but they're listening to what's coming from practitioners. So there's more sort of flexibility, and in a way a kind of creativity, I think, now. We just have to be careful that it doesn't get kind of wishy-washy and get lost, because there is that, as has been said by everybody here, we come in because we have deluded thoughts that are causing us distress and causing other people's distress, and we can't seem to just let go of them, otherwise we would. So there has to be some structure to help that, some focus, some strong focus. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Can I, just while I have you, Margaret, can I just briefly mention what you were doing last week?
Yes, but then you must stop drawing attention to it, because it plays on my love of being noticed. And yeah. But I said to myself, I thought of you, Neti. I said, beings are numberless. I vow to save them.
Yes. All right. Well, I can't help but notice you, Margaret, because you do great work in the world, and you were very courageous last week with the peace protests. I'll just say that, the anti-war protests you did last week, and I think you had an enormous impact. Many people were moved by what you did. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
All right. Maybe we should finish. Just do our chanting. and some bowing.